Good morning from Brisbane, Australia. My name's Anna O'Brien, and this morning I'm here interviewing Gary Van Warmerdam. This is the second interview in a series of interviews where we're getting to know Gary and learning about his journey of growth and transformation, and also getting some insights into his teachings and down the track, what's next for Gary. So, good morning, Gary. Nice to be here with you.
Hey, it's nice to be with you always. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. So, in our first interview, we really got to know you and particularly your journey from an abusive, unhappy relationship, difficulties in your career, and looking for a new path in your career. And we learned about you, how you got to know Miguel and some of the work that you did with Miguel. So, thank you for sharing that. Today, I wanted to have a look at your teachings and particularly the paradoxes with some of your teachings. And I often get questions about this. We're asking people to do this and then do that, which can appear like the complete opposite. And in doing that work and understanding the paradoxes there, we take a much deeper dive and understand the complexities that exist with your teachings.
Okay, hopefully I'll clarify it and not complicate it more.
Mhm.
Immediately I'm struck by this. Like, yes, I, I think yes, love people more, accept people more, and at times I teach have boundaries.
Mm. Yeah,
So
absolutely.
yeah, so
Yeah.
yeah, it
So
looks like the opposite is the
yeah,
opposite.
yes, and my experience is that can be a little confusing for people.
Yeah,
Can even bring up feelings of anger or almost like they've been tricked. We've asked you to do this. I've been focusing on that for this amount of time, and now I hear that you're saying do the complete opposite. What happened to that? Do that bit over there.
yeah.
So the first one that struck me, and it actually came up in your last interview, was the idea of believing yourself, believing your own thoughts, emotions, sensations in the moment, and staying with your own perspective, rather than moving across to someone else's perspective, and then not believing yourself and the stories, particularly from the past. And the story that you gave, the story from your past was no one else will love me.
Yeah.
I want to speak to that paradox a little bit and what's coming up for you.
Yeah, I've thought about this. What is believing in yourself? Of course, yes, believe in yourself, have faith in yourself, and then, depending on what we mean by self, don't believe yourself.
Mhm.
Okay. And it kind of depends this definition of identity. What's the self? And through as you move through layers of consciousness, you might be identified, well, the self is my body. The self is the I that's thinking. I think, therefore I am. And you're like, I'm the one thinking. I'm the one thinking all these thoughts, or then we move to I'm so emotional. I'm my emotions. I'm angry. I'm sad. I'm depressed. We identify with our emotions, right? So if you're angry and you believe in yourself, you believe you're totally justified and you're more angry. If you're, in your narrative story, so we say as thoughts, oh, I'm not good enough, nobody else will love me. I'm in the identity. I'm in an abstraction the mind has of me. And this is the tricky part about the mind. We can hypnotize ourselves into a character using the story in our head the way we think about ourselves, right? Nobody will love me, right? And And we can amplify it. Like nobody, that means an exaggeration. Nobody will love me ever. Like nobody will love me. Like the mind stamps time on that, even though we don't do. It's like forever. We don't say nobody loves me. We just shorten it, but there's a meaning of forever. And then there's a feeling of what that loneliness and disconnection and unhappy life will be. It's like we don't fully contemplate it. Like, so if you're identified with your mind, don't believe yourself. If you're identified with your emotions, don't believe your emotions. Don't believe yourself that way. If you move out into the observer and you're just watching things, you're like, oh, there's the mind saying that. There's that abstraction of Gary in that story, called characters is the word I use, but it's subpersonalities, it's archetypes, it's victim, judge, hero, villain, rebel. Don't believe the part of your mind saying that. So then you get into always as people are letting go of these parts of their mind, or they're moving into an observer state and go, wow, my mind, like I described last time, is my mind is out of control and I can't trust what it says. Then what am I that's observing this? And this was for me the beginning of consciousness pecking out of the shell. You think of a little bird coming out into the world, right? What is this thing got me trapped in here? It's my mind with all these stories and narrative stories defining who I am, and I've got to break free of it. And we crack out like, oh, there's a whole other world out here. So then we move into observer self. And use that perspective to dismantle the mind, that you don't want to believe the I and me versions of the narrative. But you're not just an observer self. You're a creative force. You have the power to create love. Okay? You have the power to create a belief. You're this force that can create stories and dissolve stories. So you have all these powers that you can then begin to develop. That is the essential. It's light, consciousness, love, power. And there's no name for what you are. But to me, it's self. It's undefined. So believe in yourself as this essence, powerful force, or in a presence that can see, that can perceive, that can create. But once you define it, once you say, I'm this, I'm a spiritual warrior, I'm a great person, I'm good enough. Now you've made it a character abstraction. Don't believe in that.
Yeah, I love that. And just to backtrack a bit, that idea of believing yourself, this is something that I actually work with people a lot when they've experienced trauma, because just like you described in that relationship that you're in previously, there's a movement away from believing yourself and a disconnection from your own thoughts, a disconnection from your own emotions and your own physical sensations. So consciously bringing people to that present awareness of themselves so that they can understand the patterns that they're operating from. But there is a tendency to over-identify with that, just like you've described, and say, well, this is me. This is my truth. And, I love how you pointed out, we're not saying it is forever.
Yeah.
But there's that kind of agreement that it is forever. And I always think my vulnerable parts in particular, are always listening. They're always
Yes.
listening to what I'm saying about them. And so it's important that we could say, oh, I'm noticing my heart's racing, or I'm feeling a bit anxious at the moment, or I'm having these thoughts at the moment. I'm identifying that this is my experience at the moment, but I'm not saying this is who I am. I'm an anxious person. And I'm not projecting that out into the future and saying, that's just my lot in life, that I'm this anxious person.
I'm an anxious person. Like, this is where you say, like, your parts, your mind has said, oh, there's identity, and move into that. When And that's so close to, I feel anxious right now and I'm having thoughts that are giving me anxiety, but it's not the same.
No.
And your mind will pick on, like, yes, that's our identity, this is who we are, and then it fixates it across time.
Mm.
And because then, like, consciousness is like, we is if we go into a dream of this identity, and that's who we are, not just then, but from that point of view, we'll look at everything in our past, and our mind will selectively pick out what's in our past that affirms that.
Mm-hmm.
Ignore anything that was different. It was like, deselects anything that contradicts when we were happy and enjoying things, or when we were around friendly people and relaxed. Like, ignores that from that
Mm-hmm.
identity perspective, and then projects that's who we will be every moment in the future. And 5 minutes later, a day later, when we're having a different experience, it doesn't, it will ignore this, hey, I'm having a wonderful time and relaxed. And it will ignore reflecting on that belief, unless we really force the issue and go, wait a minute, here I am now having this pleasant experience. There I was in the past having this pleasant experience, not anxious. Here's a contradiction. I'm not an anxious person. I and we need, and this language, the importance of this language, it has to shift if you're going to get free. You have to go from I'm an anxious person to sometimes I feel anxiety.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you have to shift the language of I, who's the identity. Have to.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
I don't emphasize it enough, but the little ways that you phrase and think about yourself will change your world. It will crack the shell and move you out of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And something I notice when I'm working with people, particularly if they're feeling hopeless, and I sort of think about it, they've over-identified with the part that's feeling hopeless. And from that perspective, they're saying, this is what my past looks like. This is what I'm experiencing in the present moment. And I'm
Mm-hmm.
going to project that out to all time.
Yes, hopelessness is the projection of that past across all time, as if we know the
Mm.
future.
Yes. And often when people are in that perspective and they've disconnected from any other perspective, they cannot remember that last week they were happy, or last week they were having some other emotional state or physical state. They cannot remember. It's like a dissociative state. And so all they remember is, it's terrible right now. I can remember it was terrible before. It will be terrible for all time.
It's a very interesting kind of hypnosis, effectiveness of hypnosis. It's stronger with people who've had trauma,
Mm-hmm.
but it's a compartmentalization. You know, the term Miguel would use to describe, he would say, the mind is dreaming. It's
Mm-hmm.
dreaming when we're asleep. It's dreaming when we're awake. It's just dreaming. It's the function of the mind to dream, and so it just generates stuff. This morning I wake up, I remember a dream I had. I woke up because I was just walking through this little creek, and then I noticed these shiny objects, and then they turned into, like, oh, it's money, and I'm picking up quarters and nickels, and then I go a little further down the creek and the water starts rushing. It's like, oh, well, now it's a stream. I dive in, and then immediately it turns to this raging river, muddy raging river, and I'm like, I'm swimming in the water in this dream. In the dream, that's the guy I am, and I have no sense that there's a person asleep in the bed, and it has this other life who's going to get up on dry land and wake up, right? So dreaming is a dissociative state, and daydreaming is a dissociative state, fantasizing or depression. And so all of these things that we're describing are dreams, in a way, waking dreams. And we become just like swimming through a river, taking us for a ride. We're in the identity of telling a story, and it's hopeless and it'll never change, and it was always this way. And like, that's the only, that narrative from that identity determines what you see. And so you have to step out of that perspective or that identity to see a different possibility. And so much of the self-mastery course is how mechanics step outside that identity, step outside the lens, step outside the narrative story. And the critical part to change, it's the most important charge to change, is this sense of identity. It's like, this was something that was very different with Miguel, and is only kind of more recent in therapy processes, is moving into a different identity of self. And the thing is, the mind says, no, that's me. Your narrative story says that's me, because we've fused this agreement that says, here, I had this experience, parents were kind of off in their own world, and I spent all the time in my room, and I felt abandoned. I feel abandoned. We tell the story, we're 5, 6, 8, 12 years old. I am abandoned. Nobody wants to be with me. And build that shell. And that's the inner world we're in. We then go out and date with the view we will be abandoned. They won't want to go out with us. We get married. They can't believe they'll stay with us. Of course, they're going to leave us. We go for a job. Of course, they won't hire us. Of course, they will fire us. Of course, I won't get the promotion because I will be rejected. They'll leave me behind. I go to the office party. I don't feel connected to anybody. We're still in the narrative story. And the most powerful part of the narrative story to break free of is the identity. I am the one everybody abandons. Because that happened, and we felt that way and built that narrative story and that identity at 8 years old or whatever. So it haunts us. And there's different ways to describe it. What we're living is a false abstraction of ourselves. So this is where you say, don't believe that self. And the uncomfortable part is, you don't know who you're going to be without that. You're going to leave that persona behind. You don't know what's going to happen. And you're going to have to do it anyways. If you're going to get out of it, you don't know what's going to happen. You don't know who you're going to be. But for me, thank God, I'm like, I don't care. I know I don't want to be that anymore. And that's the leap of faith. Like, okay, I don't know what's going to happen. That's fine. That's always the nature of the spiritual journey. I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know who I'm going to become, but I know who I don't want to be anymore. I'm going to go for it.
Yeah. And I think that second part of believing yourself, the second part of why it's important in the beginning, is I see people have difficulty focusing on themselves, and they focus their attention on other people and what's going on outside of themselves, and want to stay with, but somebody else has a different perspective. And so I'm going to leave my perspective. I'm going to leave my focusing on myself. And I'm going to jump across to, but they see it differently. Or they've got a different story. Or they said this about me.
Yeah, they have a different story about me, and we adopt the story they have about us. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So in the beginning part of the challenge, I think also is let's just stay with you.
As a process, if we're going to do this work, we're like, okay, yes, everybody has their opinion, story of you, like, but what's your story of you? Yes. Well,
Yeah.
you
And
think about, yes, you have to do it. And I get the temptation, if I may, it's like, that's because, like, where did we learn our stories? We're in the crib, and people are talking to us and they're telling us who we are. They're telling us our name. They're telling us we're beautiful. They're telling us we're good at math. We're bad at math. We're a good reader. We're a bad reader. We're smart. We're stupid. We're beautiful. We're ugly. Like all of these stories, labels we got from other people.
mm,
And we were too young to protest. And we're a sponge and we agree. And we look outside. We're not used to this, like, how am I going to define myself? What story do I want to live in? And, we probably, at 2 years old, tried to rebel, at 8 years old, at teenage years, tried to rebel against what other people told us we should do, had to do, and that got squashed, So we learn, like, well, that didn't go well. So then we move into adulthood. Like, you get to write your story, you get to create your identity. And what happens, brain goes, no, I remember when I tried that, or I felt that, no, uncomfortable, people will reject me, easier, feels better, I'll just conform. So now we have to fight this internal matrix. Even now, when you're like grown up and it's like, what do you want to be? I was always told what to be and what I should be. It's like,
yeah.
how do I decide that for myself?
Yeah. The answer is outside of you, not inside you.
Yeah.
Mm,
And I remember, there's all the little ways Miguel would dismantle that comes to mind. It's like, Miguel, what should I do? Here's my situation. What should I do? You're like, oh, well, what do you want to do? Like, no, no, Miguel, I'm asking you to tell me. But he didn't fall for taking my power away from me.
mm,
He's like, well, and maybe he'd ask questions. Have you thought about actions and consequences? And then he'd ask, well, what's in your heart? You know, what are you afraid of with this? Do you want to let your fears define you? So he'd ask exploratory questions. But in all those years, only one time did he tell me I should do something.
mhm.
But I was looking to abdicate power and choice over my life to him. And after a while, I go, no, I can't ask him those questions. I can ask him for help and guidance and sorting it out. Um, but he wasn't going to tell me and suggest to me who I should be,
Mm, yeah.
what decisions I should make. We figure it out. It's life. Grow up. Hard.
Yeah.
Adulting is hard. It's uncomfortable. We're going to make mistakes. It's okay.
Yeah. And I think, that brings you back to that uncertainty, comfortableness with uncertainty. And yeah, like you were saying, as you let go of those stories about yourself, who you thought you were,
Mm-hmm.
and the stories that you believed about yourself, that can feel a little scary. I remember feeling scared. Well, who am I now? And that's been the story of my life for 40 something years. And now I'm going to let go of it and say, that's no longer my story. It's almost me, I'd constructed this narrative. I could tell it to anybody. This is my story. And to let go of that and say, well, that's no longer going to be, my constructed story. And I'm just going to show up as me. I don't know who I am.
It's the most fun. It's
Mm,
the most liberating. We
yes.
have in Teotihuacan, there's one of the temples, beautiful courtyard, and we call it the Palace of the Butterflies. That's where the
Mhm.
high level masters would live. And the narrative of the butterfly didn't start as a butterfly. The butterfly started as a worm, caterpillar. Okay. And then it goes through this, lives its life, and then crawls up someplace, builds a cocoon, puts itself inside of it, and then goes through what's called a process where it doesn't just go and become a butterfly from a cocoon. It's like grow wings as a caterpillar. It melts into this kind of pus, this juice,
Yes.
completely dissolves, reborn as a butterfly, reforms
Mm.
itself, right? So there's a death, an ending. And I can't imagine that the caterpillar knows what he's going to become or she's going to become, right? But he knows to do it.
Mm.
Doesn't know maybe why it's building a cocoon. And I that cocoon is metaphorically this whole shell of belief systems and stories of who we are. I'm not good enough, and I'm better than you. I'm worse than you. I'm abandoned. I'm an angry person, right? All these narrative false identities, and we put ourselves in a shell. It's like, or cocoon. It's like, at a certain point, I'm like, this is too small. I can't stay in here. We either, and here's the thing, it's not like our mind decides, yes, it's time for me to transform.
Mm.
It's a matter of, gosh, the way I've been living my life, I feel trapped. Something has to change. I can't stand this anymore. I'm suffering. And we start doing things that aren't our old pattern, looking for information, doing practices that are uncomfortable. Because I think getting out of the cocoon, or the bird getting out of the eggshell, it's got to be uncomfortable.
Mm.
You're pushing up against this hard thing, right? This is the work. And the force that we have from the bird, the cocoon, or for ourselves to break free of, because this shell is essentially a false persona, false
Mm.
identity that we're dismantling, that we want to break. It's the mind, and the mind is telling us, no, we shouldn't, we're not ready, it's uncomfortable, let's not practice today, let's go, scroll social media. We've built a kind of an adaptive thing that tries to keep us thing, and it's saying, I don't want to do this, and gosh, isn't this uncomfortable? Maybe I should just distract myself with this. The I in there is, and then there's this other force going, no, this has to change. And so you really have to align with this other force and believe in that, trust that, even if it's uncomfortable, even if you feel like you're pounding against the shell and not getting through it. You have to keep pounding away at the shell, keep practicing to break free, and you get a little light. You're like, some air. Okay, so now the scenery's changed a little bit once in a while. Not done. But the identity of being a butterfly, a bird free of the shell versus in the egg, this is the human transformation. And that force that's driving us for change is driving us to, it's the universal force of life for us to awaken out of our ego shells into a higher consciousness. It's not the ego in our mind that we can look to for that answer and that drive. And so we have to align with it and go, I'm going to trust this, even if I don't know where it's going.
Yes.
Even if it's uncomfortable, I'm going to trust this. Okay. And look for, if I can give a suggestion, look for any validation, any little win along the way.
Mm-hmm.
You've got to celebrate the little wins along the way. Okay. Because you don't want to align with the ego telling you to stop and that it's wrong and it's too much and things like that, or hopeless. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's the ego mind wanting you to stop, stay in the shell, stay in the cocoon, continue to feel stuck and hopeless. It's like, no, its job was to build a shell to protect us, but then it's our job to no, we have to dismantle it.
Yeah. And I really believe in that process as being something we were designed to do, is be who we really are. And I think once we start feeling into that, we can feel more confident. Yes, I'm going to keep doing this. I don't know where it's going. I don't know who I really am. And it's not like attaining a prize or a goal at the end. It's just, to me, about having the faith to let go of the constraints that say, no, stop here, and have faith that I will go in the direction that I'm meant to go in, as long as I just keep showing up and saying yes. Mm,
Yes.
beautiful. Thank you. I love that. I love that. So, um, and we've talked about this quite a lot, the second
Oh,
paradox.
I will add to that. I didn't, the identity keeps changing. And some people say it's never done or something. It's like, well, you'd be happy with the process. I'm happy with the continual recreation of myself. And I don't want to be a finished product. A tree isn't finished growing.
Mm,
Okay? I went, I'll go to the gym and it's like, oh God, I mean, maybe I could like got some level of fitness. And like, do you stop being healthy?
mm,
You say, oh, well, I got to the level I wanted. Now I'm not going to ever go exercise again. Like, no, keep at least for your own health and benefit. And as consciousness and our souls evolving, like we keep going further. And I have this sense of enjoying the journey of recreating myself now and not looking for a finish line of what's my last identity and when will I know me? It's like, no, I'm still this force that's evolving. And I got that sense one time when I was with Miguel on one of the power journeys. And he had us do this process. And at a certain point, I was behind him and we were walking around um, the structure and doing different steps in it. And he just wasn't leading it. He was doing the process himself.
mm-hmm,
And I could see him like he's letting go. He's letting go of the most recent shell and abstraction of himself that he's been created, that he created.
mm-hmm,
I'm like, this is Miguel. Why is he? Where is he going to go? Right? And so I asked him later. I'm like, you were doing the process also. You were also letting go. He's like, oh, of course. I recreate myself again,
mm,
but this time better than my previous version. So the fastest kind of transformation is to transform your identity. So even at that level, my sense of what I'm doing now, it's like I don't know who I'll be next,
mm-hmm.
but I want to keep growing.
Yes. Something that's coming to mind for me is my husband. Particularly if I go away on a retreat, he says to me, I don't know who's coming home.
But he's probably not scared of it now. He's not like
No,
on edge. He's like, oh, this will be interesting. Good. Let's see who you are next.
yeah, yeah,
Beautiful.
yeah, beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. The other thing that came to mind for me as I was thinking about your teachings is, while we're doing the work, and particularly in the early years, I would say, we really lean into our suffering. And, I'm thinking from a trauma perspective, really leaning into the trauma, getting to know the trauma from different perspectives, feeling the emotion that was attached to that trauma that perhaps we've still been holding on to, feeling into the physical body and what we've been holding on to, and the thought patterns. So we really lean into that suffering. And, for me, that was really painful, something that I'd been trying to stay away from for decades. Now I'm going to turn around and get to know it more and feel everything that's stored there more. So really leaning into that suffering, and then also the idea in your teachings of freedom from the suffering and coming to understand that we are not the suffering. And that was such a big learning for me because I thought I was my suffering. You know, I imagined it like something that I carried around with me everywhere I went. I didn't want to feel it, but I was so identified with it.
When you say, yeah, you were identified with it, you were, that's who I am, that's my story, that's my identity. Yeah.
And this will always be.
And it'll always be.
Mm. And I was, I had quite a lot of suicidal ideation from that perspective
Mm-hmm.
because I couldn't undo my trauma.
Not by yourself, no.
Mm. But even the events that had led to my storing of trauma, I could not undo those events.
When you say, okay, so clarify, couldn't do the events, you couldn't change the history of it, or you couldn't change the emotions and the patterns that had built up as a consequence of it.
Well, I had the story
Yeah,
that I had experienced these events, which led to these emotions, physical sensations,
yeah,
beliefs about myself.
yeah,
And I identified with that. This is me.
right,
And I projected out into the future. This will always be. I cannot change any of that.
yeah.
And it will always be this way. I was wondering, when is this over? Whereas when I, through your teachings, learn I am not my suffering. Yes, I have suffered, but I am not that victim. I can look at my suffering now. Yes, I went through terrible things. And from that, I held a lot of emotions and sensations in my body, beliefs about myself, beliefs about other people. And I can step out of that and it not be me. The story, the history is still there, but I'm a happy, I love myself.
Yeah, yeah. Your
And
your sense of who yourself is different. Yeah, a lot's changed. So is this the contradiction? Like, okay, really love yourself and embrace love and be happy, and the contradiction of like how we lean into our suffering in the process.
yeah, so that
Yeah.
leaning into the suffering in the beginning
What do you mean by leaning in?
to turn and face it
Okay.
and say, instead of just wanting to get away from it, I'm going to get to know it more, but from a different perspective,
Yeah. See,
from
that's
more of
the
a perspective.
yeah. That's
Yes,
that's the that's the key
yes.
because and particularly the strength of the trauma or the strength of the emotional experience and nervous system. There's that identity bit, right? And if if I invite someone to like, oh, remember a time when you felt sad or you felt angry or you felt happy, right? Oh, the memory flashes, the emotion can pop up. A whole part of your brain says, oh, this is where you are, this is who you're with, right? And in that memory, you can imagine yourself in that memory
Mm.
and you can become the person in the memory. Okay, that thing I did in front of the whole school that was the most embarrassing thing in high school, right? And that fires the neural pathways that then secretes the chemicals in my body and the cortisol in my face and changes my blood flow and I get embarrassed red in my face. Like by thinking of a memory, I changed my home physiology, the chemistry in my body,
Mhm.
right? So think of like, it's like depression, due to chemical imbalance. It's like, well, thinking of a memory changes my chemistry. Putting
Yes.
myself in the identity of that embarrassing moment that lasted, 2 minutes changes my chemistry.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Well, now my body's going to feel that way.
Yeah.
Okay. So it's very tricky to face the past, see a memory and not fire emotions, not fire the physiology, the physical chemistry and the muscle response, the nervous system response, the tightness in the gut, right? How do you face it?
Mm.
How do you face it? Because most people do it without the skills and the practice necessary to like be the observer,
Mm-hmm.
where they're breathing, they're self-regulating, their body's relaxed, they hold their awareness and see, oh, that's the memory of myself. That's Gary at 17 in high school on the basketball court, in front of everybody. I would like watch the movie of it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So and this is why I asked about, do we lean into our suffering? Because are we leaning into am I in the identity of myself back then in that moment? Or am I leaning into the identity of the observer because I've practiced some exercise, I'm writing this out, journaling, third person, and the characters, and am I doing the exercises on this memory? Am I breathing the emotion, helping this 17-year-old boy process shame?
Yeah.
Okay. Am I leaning into the practice with the perspective of observer, breathing, moving the energy, regulating my nervous system because I'm here today, regulating my breathing right now? And I'm giving myself this dual experience of here, present today, with my body, with my breath, with my emotions, with my perspective in the present, all of those elements, right? Because if you go through the self-mastery course, I'm breaking down all of those elements.
Yes.
Watching the 17-year-old version in memory, helping him out of the emotions, breathing, relaxing his body, helping him laugh at the crowd, helping him laugh at himself. I'm like, hey, everybody has something embarrassing. Let's laugh at it now. Or just let's go some shame now, or let's let go of the stories about what people are imagining. Like, you don't know what they're imagining. They're just glad they're not embarrassed, right? It's like, let's deal with every little layer of that. Okay. So you're in present time, perspective, emotion, narrative, about perspective, emotion, narrative, physiology. I don't know many people who can walk in day one and do that. But that's the leaning in, like
Yes.
fundamentals, put these 4 or 5 skills in practice, now apply it. But most people, they're trying to process a memory that is flashing them, that's giving an abandoned feeling, an anger feeling from the past. They think about it, they're in it again. They
Yes.
lose their perspective to the identity of their past self. They're compartmentalized in there, and boom, the world looks that way. They feel that way, their body's doing it. And this is why it's so hard. This is what needs to be done to break that sense of, oh, I'll never get out of it.
Mm.
Because every time they've done this, oh, I've tried to deal with it, or it keeps happening. I always feel this way. It's like, well, yeah, because your brain's doing the same cycle and you haven't
Yeah. You
changed
just,
perspective. You haven't changed what your body feels. You've lost touch with the present moment. You aren't doing these other things to shift your body while the memory's activating.
yeah. You're just re-traumatizing yourself.
You're re-traumatizing yourself.
Mm.
Okay. But like having awareness of perspective and emotions and physical body and narrative stories and other beliefs, it's like you're juggling a couple balls. You got to practice one ball at a time and build up to that.
Absolutely.
Or sit with somebody who can guide you through every little element of that so that those neural pathways are changed when they
Yeah.
fire.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
And
that the leaning in, I know in the beginning, like, yeah, you're gonna crash, you're gonna fall into it, and okay, yeah, all right, I lost my perspective, I fell into the memory, I was playing the victim role, everything looked helpless, and for some people, it's like you get yourself out in 3 days, and some people, then after a while, you get yourself out more often in a day, and then more often in a few hours, and then more often in a few minutes. It's like falling down into those old memories and re-traumatizing or reactivating those emotions. Normal, know that it's gonna happen, and the period that you're there gets less and less, provided you're practicing these skills to hold perspective and attention in your nervous system regulation and emotions. Like, it's gonna happen. We're gonna fall into it, and you're gonna learn not to be there as long or as deep.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. Some elements that I've noticed are helpful so that we're not re-traumatizing, because I certainly did the re-traumatizing for quite a period of time before I got the help that I needed. It was just every time I looked in that direction of my suffering, re-traumatize.
Yeah.
So I tell myself the story, I can never recover from this because every time I look in that direction, I'm just re-traumatizing myself. So what do we need to be there? Observer perspective. We're always starting there. And like you say, it's giving us that dual awareness of I'm having this experience. I can see I'm having this experience. Gives you that little bit of space that,
And then you go, I can see my 17-year-old self or whatever person you were in the past. Oh, I see myself in my memory having that experience. Like, have a separation of time.
mm,
Any time, distance, any separation you can add to it to build uh, helps.
yeah. And the second thing I've noticed is choice. I am choosing to look in this direction. And I think that also helps to give a bit of separation from just falling into that experience, especially if we're younger, to I'm actually going to stay in adult perspective and I am choosing to work on this experience. And I can choose to stop at any time if I notice I'm getting overwhelmed.
Stating it that way, what you're applying is what we would call conscious intent. Like, I have a purpose for looking this direction. And that alignment energetically is that force of life that is, we're aligning with that force of life. I'm looking at the shell and the cocoon in order to dismantle it. Like, that puts you in the identity of this force of life, that I'm like, I'm aligning with this force because this is what's supposed to happen to break me free. Conscious intent. Why? Yeah, and stating it out loud. I'm going to sit down and write, and this is what I'm going to do, and this is why. Absolutely state it. It changes, because then now what are you doing? You're defining your perspective you're going to look from, and what you're
Yeah,
going to do with what you find.
yeah, yeah, I love that. A third element, calmness, some way of keeping us grounded and our nervous system somewhat calm. So we know again, it's another signal. I'm not being re-traumatized. My nervous system is letting me know that I'm safe in the present moment. And that might be having someone with you, a guide, a friend, someone who lets you know, I'm here on the sidelines, almost like a lifesaver at the beach,
Mm-hmm.
saying, I'm here, let me know if you need help grounding or staying attached. For
Mm-hmm.
me, it was sitting in the forest. I felt very grounded and attached in the forest.
In the beginning, you'd go to the forest. You felt safe there.
In the beginning, it was you. I know.
I
There were
thought
times,
you were scared to go to the forest, as I remember in the beginning.
yeah,
Yeah. Okay.
yes. So in the beginning,
Later, you were thrilled with the forest.
yeah. And I remember phoning you if I became ungrounded,
Oh,
in tears. saying, basically, I've fallen into the pit of misery. I am here and I believe everything that's here. Can you please drag me out of here? Yeah. But
Yeah.
whatever
Just be
way,
positive and reassuring and go, yeah, you're okay. It's okay to fall in the pit. And that's a
yeah.
big thing today. It's like, yeah, it's okay to fall in the pit, because here's the thing that gets added to it. It's like, oh, I failed. I'm a failure. I'll always be a failure. And it's like, so the judgment comes, the narrative of the judgment comes. So then what's the antidote to that? It's like, hey, that's quite okay. Beautiful. You fell in the pit. You're going to be fine.
Yeah.
Because I will, when I do that, I'm like, I'm just bursting the balloon of that self-judgment and failure story. And it's like, so I apply as much acceptance to the situation. It's like, okay, and this is a great case. It's like, yeah, now you want from that life force the narrative story I'm giving you.
Hmm. Yes.
And that's
Yes.
that's the interesting thing. It's like, okay, that's go food for that's food for my soul. That's going to keep me going. That's going to pull me out of the hole. Yes. So it's interesting. Like, no, we don't want anybody's narrative stories, but then we also want to, like, no, I'm going to need some lifelines to pull me out, pull me forward, and lift me up. And it's like, who's giving me a narrative story that takes me in the direction I want to go? It's like, I can grab hold of it. Why not?
Yeah, absolutely. And I remember one story that you told me once. I said, I feel like I'm in the ocean and I'm drowning. And that's really how I felt. And you said to me, you're not in the ocean, you're in a swimming pool. And I'm on the sidelines, and you've got other people on the sidelines. And, it's interesting. That helped my mind so much because the vastness of the ocean, and, I'm not a swimmer, I'm not a good swimmer. The idea of drowning was, you know, I was falling into a deep pit. Whereas you say to me, you're not in the ocean, you're in a swimming pool. And I'm saying, thank you for that narrative.
Yeah.
That helps me.
Yeah, because I'm standing on the shore and I see you right there. You know.
Mm. Yeah.
Okay. And I know the box you're in. It's like, I know there's lots of safe places to go.
Yeah.
So to me, it's like that's where you were, and you're like, oh, and it's interesting. Like, okay, then you're in that dream, in that version. The picture changes by suggestion. The mind is like, okay, I'll accept that dream, build that. But here's a funny story. Somebody else similar, he's like, oh, I feel this deep, despair or whatever, sadness, and it's like an ocean, and I'm just like, it's dark, and I'm like, okay. So we go into meditation. I'm gonna guide him into the ocean. Like, hey, you're in the deep in the ocean. And you're drowning. Let's drown. Let's go underwater.
Mhm.
So, but I was one on one with him,
Yeah.
and I'm like, and I had been working with him, and I knew he could track with me. I said, let's go into the ocean. Good. Let's just take that whole scene, that whole feeling. And it's like, okay, you're in the ocean. It's dark, and let's sink down. Let's surrender into it.
Hmm.
And we went on a great journey. Okay, until he's not afraid of deep dark water, and he's like, because he found out, I'm like, okay, you're in the deep dark water now. It's way underneath. What's happening? You're like, well, I'm still here. And now it's happening. Like, well, did you run out of air? It's like, no, I'm still here.
Mm.
Okay, can you look around? So yeah, I can look around. It's like, oh, okay. Now, what do you want to do down here? He's like, well, let's just sit with it a little bit longer. Oh, okay. So we can go places often guided that we don't know how to do on our own.
Yeah,
And then he's
absolutely.
like, then he's not afraid of that sadness. He's not afraid of and the voices in his head that were telling him it's terrible. He's like, who are you guys? I'm fine down here.
Yeah. Yeah.
So there's oh, it gets to be fun.
Absolutely. And, I was able to then have that experience as well of being in the ocean and being okay. Similarly, with the forest, originally, like you say, I couldn't go into the forest. In a way, you guided me to go into the forest for that bit to be okay. And then I'm okay in the forest.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think that groundingness and some capacity to stay calm is so important in this process. And then the other part
I
for
went, I
me,
went, I went back and I put in that couple of relaxation exercises and put one in the gratitude session. I'm like, okay, if you can't feel gratitude, because a lot of people start, they're in depression, they're in numbness, they don't have the personal power and attention to feel grateful about anything. I'm like, fine, don't practice that. Practice relaxation. Practice just being present with your breath, relaxing your body, because that regulation of the body, with your breath, what are you doing? You're shifting the channels where your brain is operating from. It's pulling you out of fight or flight, amygdala brain, pulling you into frontal cortex. You have executive function. You can, from there, like you said, do one of the critical elements of make choices, right? And exercise power.
yeah,
And then define purpose and identity. So, as I've worked and have more experience with people in trauma, I start with the body. Let's get relaxed so that we can get out of the fight or flight perspective. Because if you're in fight or flight, you're not going to process anything very well.
mm, yeah, yeah, terrific. Um, Another thing I like to do is coloring in. If we're coloring in or using colored pens, we're signaling to our mind and body that everything's okay. So even if people are journaling, use some pretty pens, change colors, it will actually signal to them that everything's okay. Yeah, draw some
Okay.
pictures around the edge.
Right.
Mm,
Nice. I
yeah.
could see that. I could see that. You create, because you're using a creative part of your brain, which is kind of the executive side as well. Yeah.
Mm,
Yeah,
yeah.
that's better. That's better. Thank you.
And another element to this for me is, because we're an observer perspective, we're exerting choice, which, as soon as we're using choice and agency, we're out of victimization and interpersonal power. We're in charge here. We've got someone helping us to stay regulated or something to stay regulated. Then we can look back at the story in a different way. And something that I get very conscious of is I think when we've originally looked back at the story, we're focused on what's wrong, and that makes perfect sense. It's a terrible event. We look back and say, what's wrong here? Well, I did the wrong thing. Very focused on ourselves too. What did I do wrong here? And what I like to do is I really appreciate our wisdom. I think we're always operating from wisdom. And if we did something in a terrible situation, I can guarantee you it was the wisest decision. So I look at it with people and say, what did you do right here? Or what was the wisdom here? And I
Mm-hmm.
was talking to someone the other day and they said, well, this terrible thing was happening. And I went into submission and I actually apologized to the person who hurt me
Mm-hmm.
and look at what is the wisdom there? Why was that the best move for you to make at the time? Because this person was exerting power, they were aggressive, you were likely to experience more harm if you didn't do that.
Yeah.
So
Well,
first thing they did
go
was
ahead.
submit.
Yeah. Yeah. And here's part of the unlayering of a belief system. Like, oh, I went and I submit, and we can say, well, I don't want to do that. That's wrong. That's bad. And what you're doing is there's a story on top of that story. It's layered. It's like, oh, that was wrong. That was bad to do that. I don't want to be doing that. But you're coming back and say, well, let's change. That's the story on top of this submit behavior. And like, let's change the story that it's wrong. It was like good things about doing that. There's wisdom in doing that because you de-escalate potential conflict or whatever it was. And then you're like, oh, well, now we can work on this piece. So deconstructing the stories about the stories.
Mm.
Yeah, you have to do all those elements of it.
Yeah, yeah. And looking at even in that submit case, what did that allow you to do? What were you thinking about when you're submitting? She's like, how to get the hell out of here? That's her next move. So, wisdom, changing the story from what did you do wrong here to what did you do right? And, when you start to do all of those things, observer perspective, choice, calming the nervous system, changing the story from a negative to a positive.
Mhm.
That's what I did with my trauma. I look back and say, I'm a bad motherfucker, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah, what I
Yeah.
got through and how I got through it, kudos to me. That's the story that I tell myself. And
You have a kind of superpower that nobody's gonna, it's like superpower.
mm,
Yeah. Where steel is forged in heat and pressure. Diamonds are stored, forged in heat and pressure. You know, it's like it makes if we use it, if we use our hardships properly and use them as that, we get incredible strength.
mm,
Yeah, by
yeah.
climbing out of those places.
And again, coming back to that idea that my parts are always listening.
Yeah.
So instead of them hearing the narrative, oh, I did something wrong, again, feeling the shame of that, da 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 da. Instead, they hear, oh, thank you for your service. You did exactly the right thing. And
Mm-hmm.
that allowed me to survive. That allowed me to get here. So they're like,
And
they're
their
fine.
emotion changes from fear and fear of judgment to, oh, I feel some acceptance. I feel some gratitude. And that energetic, you're changing the energetic construct of that part of your mind when it receives the gratitude you give it, the acknowledgement, the praise you give it. It's like what you're doing is you're feeding your mind a completely different emotional diet. That, that's powerful transformation.
Mm,
I want to reflect on something about this process because we're talking about deconstructing your history and deconstructing your identity. And in doing that, there's a tendency to get into like, well, this happened to me. This is who I am. And then we come along and we say, no, that's not who you are. But those are two kinds of things that are so merged. Like, well, no, that's not who you are. But they go, yeah, I am. Yeah, that's who I am because that's what happened to me.
mhm,
Or no, that's not who you are. Like, well, how could that not be who I am? That's what happened to me.
mm,
So there's kind of like I have to like really thin slice some pieces because people are so merged with their identity of this is who I am. I've been victimized by this. I'm hurt. To kind of go to thin slice that and not and find some little gaps to both validate what happened.
mhm,
Yes, that happened. We're not saying that's not who you are and it didn't happen. We're saying, yeah, that happened. What it's hugely like that happened. I'm sorry that happened, acknowledged it. And then you built some agreements that said, that's who I am. And that defines me. But often those are so close together that when we
mm,
try to change one, we try to change the identity, they feel like their history and the things they know as facts, what happened to them is invalidated. Or we trying to change it, the story about, well, yes, but now you're in a victim story about it still in present time. They go, well, yeah, but it really happened. There's
yes,
this merging of time of present victim and past experience victim. We have to say, yeah, well, there's a narrative story victim that's present now, but it's not happening now. And we have to split these versions of identity, present victim story versus past that was really victimized. Present
mhm,
story, not true. Or at least we like, even though it still feels true because we haven't processed the emotion. And yet, past, yes, you really were victimized. That really did happen, and you were victimized. And you're not a victim now. So it's like this contradiction
yes,
that you have to hold this incongruency with as you process.
yeah. And what's coming up for me is I think the rational mind plays a big part in this because it says well, you were victimized before, you did the wrong thing, you didn't behave appropriately. And so this dilemma could happen again because you've got the story, I'm weak or I'm vulnerable or something. And so it says, well, this could happen again. I'm still vulnerable. And it's a dilemma for the rational mind. Whereas when we can change that story to, I always act in the most wise and appropriate way,
Mhm.
then I was a child. Now I'm an adult who always acts in the most wise and appropriate way. Well, if I do that now as an adult, I'm not going to experience that same trauma that I experienced when I was a child.
Yeah, and this is you do by
Oh,
changing this story that's layered over top. Oh, I did the wrong thing, but I will still do the wrong thing because that's who I am. Yeah, you change that to say, no, I'm doing the wise, appropriate thing. Then you're like, oh, I can do the wise and appropriate thing today. Yeah, it's interesting when we go back in time, change something that's a belief in the past, it shows up in the present, it gets projected into the future then. So now the future possibility looks different. So how the mind like goes across time, it's like really fun to like time travel, change an agreement in the past. Oh, now my future looks different.
yes. And that's why I really like to work with my rational mind and bring it along with me because it's
Mm-hmm.
very useful. And yeah, when it now sees me as a wise and
Mm-hmm.
discerning person, it says, well, okay, I can relax now. That dilemma's not going to show up in the same way it did when I was younger.
Yeah, yeah. This is retraining your mind.
Mm.
Yeah, having it get to know you as a present adult self instead of, because very often that mind, if you talk to part characters, you're like, well, who are you protecting and who's making decisions? Like they see a 5-year-old, they see an 8-year-old. They're like, well, she's not capable of navigating this situation or these situations. So we've got to have these reactions. So they're like, well, wait a minute. Have you seen the adult self here show up? Like, no, no, we don't know who she is. We don't know who he is. We think the 5 and 8-year-old is still making the decisions.
Mm.
So the mind is time displaced in the past and seeing and thinks that the person in present time is adult, who doesn't see the present adult self making decisions. It thinks the child's still making decisions or past selves making decisions. So it's a fascinating time dilation.
Mm.
And it tells you how unaware, when you start doing this enough, you sign up how unaware the mind is what's really going on in the outside world.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I worked with a client and she was lots of abuse from her mother. And mother had been dead 10 years. When we were cleaning up parts and characters would show up. So why are you doing this? I'm afraid to get punished by mom. I said, well, do you know mom's dead? They're like, what? Yeah, she
Yeah.
died 10 years ago. They're like, what? Kind of these parts of the mind that are still living in childhood, afraid mother's going to come along. She's been dead 10 years. They were thrilled to hear this. Oh, great. Right, I can relax now. This isn't going to happen. Nothing to worry about. Like sometimes, boom, that quick.
Yeah. Yeah. Amazing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Amazing. And I always do like to I always like to look at ourselves in the best possible light. And I do think that we're very wise and I think we're capable of amazing things. Thank
We
you.
are. We're magicians.
Mm,
It's a lot of the magic and agreements we make have been black magic, but we're
yeah.
magicians. We're powerful magicians.
Mm, yes, terrific. The final paradox that I wanted to focus on today was the importance of action. And that warrior part's coming to mind for me, going into battle, taking
Mm-hmm.
action,
Mm-hmm.
and also the need for stillness and that non-attachment to the outcomes.
Well, stillness is an action.
Mm,
I'm going to sit still. And of course, the mind, if I'm going to sit still and breathe and relax, like the mind will come. It's like, well, no, you can't rest. You have more to do today. What's to keep us busy? I mean, one of the greatest plays it has is busyness. Because we're busy, there's activities in the world and answering emails and even just scrolling social media. We're busy. We don't notice it. We don't notice the shell and the cocoon and what it's pushing down on us. We're distracted. But if you're still, it will probably be an uncomfortable stillness. But just like we said, you'll take the time and you'll notice it pushing down on you with story or impulses and emotion. And you'll go, oh, here, it's pushing on me. What's it have to say? And then you can go further. You take the tools and practices in the course in the book, and you're like, oh, okay, I don't like the way it's pushing down on me. All right, what am I going to do about it? But the ego cocoon that's has us trapped. Yeah, keep us busy. We won't even notice it. So if we don't notice it, we won't do anything about it. Because it's in a self-preservation mode. It's afraid we'll wake up and see it. And so that's the stillness part. Well, we can go much further in that. I mean, gosh, remember one of the advanced practices we go, we would sit still for hours. I mean, the first time we sat for this, it was a very long process over many, many months. It was just about sitting still, noticing all the impulses to move. He's like, make your body still. Don't follow any impulse to move. Fly lands on your nose. Don't move it. It's like, and it was exercising your will. It was one of the practices to really amplify, breathe, connect with your will, to stay still and refrain. Because the ego mind wants to push emotional reaction and wants to push your voice to react, to say something in reaction. Stillness is an antidote to those reactions that the mind is trying to get you to play out. Okay? And those reactions are not the same as action. Okay? So why all of the practices and everything I try to do is like has some action to it is because have people for their transformation, you have to move away from knowledge. All of this cocoon, the shell of the ego, to get free from that box. It's made of knowledge. Concepts, ideas, stories of ourselves, an idea of ourselves. We are this, we're an abandoned person, we're an angry person. Oh, I'll never change, it'll never be any different, like our projected future. Those are ideas. How do you change an idea? How do you dissolve an idea? Right? It's generally with awareness. But if I come up with another idea and I try to pound on it with an idea, it's like an idea doesn't change an idea very well. Now, an awareness that something in this idea is false, you instinctively, oh, I'm not going to believe that. You take the energy out of it, you take the faith out of it, or you take the idea and you can remove the emotion. That's an action. You can change, you write it, journaling outside observer perspective, you change the perspective in journaling. You breathe, you relax your nervous system, you're changing some component of this dream. And the dismantling of that dream is the dismantling of the cocoon. And this is freedom, and it's freedom from suffering. It's freedom from your old stories, your old identity. the ego identity. It happens through action, even if sometimes action is observing or breathing and refraining from moving, refraining from believing. And I'm like, okay, that's what it's saying, but maybe that's not true. Or maybe there's an assumption in there that sounds true, but maybe there's an assumption in there that's false. And like, maybe it's half true. What part is true? What's part of half true? Like, just to hold it at bay. No, you're not breaking the belief, but you just hold it at bay and like question it long enough is an action.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I said, just as an example, I was someone recently, he had this anxiety and he was afraid of holding a baby. He's like, oh yeah, I've always been afraid of holding a baby because it's like, well, why? It's like, well, I'll just do something terrible. I'll crush it or I'll drop it. Or
Mm-hmm.
he's like, because he was just having some intrusive thoughts. I said, well, went off book a little bit. So we'll pick something up off your desk. He's holding a remote of something. I was like, okay, I want you to tell the intrusive thought, just hold it gently and tell the intrusive thought, make me crush it, make me throw it, make me destroy it. So we just, because he wanted to have control over himself from these intrusive thoughts and see that thoughts had no power. So I just like, well, challenge it, man. Like, give me your best, man. Tell the intrusive thoughts, give me your best, make me throw it and drop it and crush it. And so he could see the intrusive thoughts really kind of amp it up. I'm like, are you doing anything different? No, I can hold it easily. So his action was just to sit there and hold it still and watch the intrusive thought flail away. But as he held it still, he's like, I got the power over what I do with this.
Mm-hmm.
And the intrusive thought can't tell me what to do, and I don't have to agree with it. It just got further and further away until it started to be funny. I was like, wow, it's really upset that it can't make me do anything. It's like a little child having a temper tantrum. You're not giving me the candy bar. Like, no, I'm not.
Yeah.
So the action is what changes your experience.
Mm-hmm.
And your experience will give you a new story. And it will dismantle the old one that said, this is the way it is. When you
Mm-hmm.
have a new experience, the old story held up against it says, well, that can't be true. I just experienced this.
Mm-hmm.
So those actions that give you a new experience help you break free of all the concepts, ideas, beliefs that we've acquired in the past, that it's the way it was, that it will always be that way. It's like, no, right now I'm experiencing something different because I took an action. And by taking a new action, I have a new experience. You shatter all these old paradigms very quickly.
Mm. I love that. Uh, the first thing that you said is, that stillness and non-attachment to outcomes is an action. Yeah, that's just really stood out to me. And again, sitting in the forest, I'd be sitting there, I'm like, I'm going to sit here still for an hour or so. And that was so hard. It was so hard because, and I started to notice I did it every day for a long time. Predictable things would come up. My back hurts, then I'm hungry. I've just eaten, but I'm suddenly hungry.
The mind
Um,
is throwing you illusions.
yeah,
Yeah.
there's a bug on me, or I heard something. And I noticed sitting in that stillness, and I had the intention, I'm going to sit here for this period of time. And that's the
Mm-hmm.
only intention I had, to sit there.
But it was
But
interesting.
I noticed these
Stillness,
parts coming up.
stillness, and you didn't follow the proposed fear because they're all fears. You're like, I'm
Mm,
not going to act upon that story. I'm not going to contribute to its validation. I'm not going to validate the fear.
mm. And, I was able to start looking, and I still do, at any information that I get in my body as just information. I'm having a thought. Thank you. That's just information. And I choose what to do with that. I work with people who often have suicidal ideation. And I say, tell me what that part is telling you. It's like da 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 da, this. You go, good information. Do you have to follow that? No, it's just information.
It's information.
And the same with our emotions, information. Thank you for telling me about that. I get to choose whether I follow through with any action or not, and what kind of action. Yeah, because I think,
But
emotionally,
you can do that. Sorry,
that's okay.
you can do that because you've practiced exercising your will. Okay, in the beginning you couldn't do that.
No.
No, but you sat in the forest and the bug would come. You're like, okay, well, there was a struggle not to move, not to like, okay, or I heard a voice, I heard a sound. It's like, oh, do I need to get up and run? Like, oh no, like just sitting still. You're taking that willful force of life that says grow, evolve, and the cocoon pushing on you, knowing, no, go back, get in your little shell and let us be in charge. With fear, you're going, no, you're not in charge, and no, you're not in charge. And yeah, my body's hurt. It's like, okay, it's uncomfortable. It'll pass. Usually it passes. That's the funny thing.
It does.
3 minutes later, you're thinking about something else. You don't even know your body's uncomfortable. You're like, oh, God, I'm fine now. It's like, it didn't last, Oh, and I actually am not hungry. It's like, well, all of this passes. And you find out, you're like, the stuff your mind was feeding you is not true. But you're creating a new experience by that action to sit still. And you find out after a while, you're like, wow, all that stuff my mind said I had to do, or that I was tired and hungry and I had to run, like none of that was true. And you get your power back. You get your power back. And now you just look at it. Like now you can look at it as information. But here's the thing, it's like people aren't going to start there. You didn't start there. I didn't start there. Like you sit still and be uncomfortable and stay still. 5 minutes. If you do 5 minutes and you're like, oh, let's see if I can do 6 minutes today. I did 6 minutes today. Okay, good. Let's see tomorrow if I go for 7 minutes. Whatever it is, sit still. Watch the mind throw you a barrage about why it's a waste of time. It'll never work. This is doing nothing. Do it anyways. That action to refrain, sit. Your will is getting stronger, and the beliefs and the shell is breaking. Because you strengthen your will over time. I asked Miguel once, I'm like, all this suffering we do, like all of this, we come here on this planet, we're like, all of this is like something like long times of suffering. It's like, I'm like, is this really necessary? It's like, why? He's like, oh, because it will make your will strong. But as I said, what's the benefit? He's like, it will make your will strong, but only if you exercise it. If you go along with everything you believe and you let your mind stay in charge, your will doesn't get strong. The butterfly has to push his way out of the cocoon or her way out of the cocoon. They have to exert that effort or they don't get out. The bird has to exert effort and pound away with in the dark, with no sense of progress. It's pounding away, it's pushing, it's fighting against the shell in every direction. It doesn't know how it will happen. It doesn't even know what's happening. It's in the dark, doesn't know how to get out. We're the same, And eventually maybe it starts pecking with its beak. It's like, okay, there's a sharp point that will work. But it has to trial and error, all sorts of things that didn't work. And then the first peck with the beak doesn't work. But eventually, like, you break free. Okay. That's the action.
Yeah.
because we're fighting concepts and knowledge and ideas. And if we read books, if we just listen to podcasts, we get more concepts and knowledge and ideas, and our mind uses it. Now it has more ammunition to do the same stuff it was doing before. It's just better at it because we've given it more ammunition to use. And what's actually needed is, no, you need to empty it. You need to let go of it. You need to, this whole structure of beliefs you've collected, let go of it. One little moment at a time.
Mm. And
This
something,
is why the self-mastery course and recapitulation is all about dissolving that whole structure.
yeah, something that you just mentioned there is what's the benefit? And, I think this is that second part of non-attachment to outcomes. For example, the the butterfly coming out of the cocoon and it looks at itself and says, "This is not what I wanted." You know, I'm a yellow butterfly. I wanted to be a blue butterfly. This is not what I wanted. And similarly,
Like, who am I? How did this happen? What is this?
I reject this. This is not what I wanted. Or, sitting in the forest. And I hear this from people a lot with meditation. I've been meditating and I didn't get the outcome that I wanted. Yeah. And so, what's the benefit? And stepping away from, I want some sort of measurable benefit at the end of this exercise. For example, when I went and sat in the forest, I was going through a really hard time that year. And I just felt called to do this. I didn't have a specific outcome in mind. I knew I needed a bit of time and space to just sit and process.
Yeah.
And yeah, I didn't have a specific outcome. But what I found from sitting in the forest is there's so much wisdom there. And I feel like it was of a lot of benefit to me, but it wasn't like an ordered benefit.
No, and not one that you can predict, not one that your mind, because what is your mind says, oh, I want this.
Yeah.
But we'll call it your soul that's looking to grow and break free of your ego mind. Your consciousness wants to break free and get out of the shell. And no, it's going for its own agenda, and the identity of the mind has no idea what the outcome is being. Yeah, I've had that question, Miguel. I'm like, hey, this, here I was at this plateau, and I'm like, this is not where I thought, this is, this is not what I thought it would be. And he's like, well, of course not. What'd you expect? Like, which is, to me, what did your ego mind expect? Well, I expected this,
Yes.
yeah. But do you think my fear-based belief system had a very good idea to predict what I would become? Do you think that the cocoon that is built knows what it is to be a butterfly? That could predict the butterfly that will come out of it? No. The egg shell cannot predict how the bird will fly.
Mm.
Okay. The cocoon cannot tell you or imagine the outcome of what the butterfly will look like and how it will fly. Okay. That ego mind can't tell you much about what you're going to become.
I'm just wondering if that's a good place to leave it today. I feel like these are topics that we could talk about for a very long time.
Lovely. Yes. Let's leave it
Mm.
here.
Yeah, and thank
You'll
you for your
you'll
insights. And
you'll come up
um,
with more questions. Add to this if
I
you
have more
want to follow
questions
up.
already. I have more questions already.
Okay.
And so, yes, this is the second interview in a series of interviews. And I'm just really loving this deep delve into your perspective on your teachings and practices.
Thank you for asking the questions that people have and asking for the clarity and sorting through the kind of contradictions and the journey.
Beautiful. Nice seeing you today. Take care.
Always lovely to see you. Love you.